Hey guys, welcome back to the Results Junkies podcast. We're talking about a return to work and whether that's a tool that companies are using to shed jobs. We've got another article that's really interesting about the laws that are being passed in California in relation to AI. I'll be honest, Paul, I knew about some of these, but not all of them. I think it's a pretty interesting list that we're going to be going through. But we're going to start with jobs because I think it's an interesting. I think you had a point on this that I didn't even see coming in terms of a connection to something that we talked about last week in relation to Klarna. Brief little bit of housekeeping first. Show at resultsjunkies.com is how you find us. If you're listening, go ahead and like the episode and leave us a review or rating. Super helpful. If you're watching us on YouTube, follow the show and like this episode. Mr. Singh can be found at Paul Singh on all the social media channels, and I am at Pizza in Motion. So yeah, man, Amazon is sending everybody back to the office.
Well, first off, you have had a day. I think you were, let's see, at the time of this recording, you landed exactly an hour ago.
I think like 62 minutes ago, I landed at Dulles. Yeah, it's the ugly double way home from Las Vegas, where I take the last flight out of the night, land at O'Hare, depending on what time the flights are scheduled, somewhere in like the 11 or 12 o'clock range, fall into a bed at the Hilton O'Hare, hope to plug the phone in long enough to set the alarm for the morning, wake up at, 6:30 or 7 after like 6 hours of sleep, and hop on the plane to fly the rest of the way home to be here in the morning.
Oh man, and here I thought you were just sitting in your ivory tower and business travel is so easy for you. Well, you're definitely more cheerful right now than I would be had I done that same route.
Yeah, I guess I'm just used to it now, but I'm sure the energy will dissipate soon. And for those that aren't watching on video, you can't see me chugging this Virginia Tech coffee mug to caffeinate myself enough to be coherent during the podcast.
Oh, whatever. There's probably some champagne or wine in there, I'm sure.
It is a good call. All right, so let's talk about this, man. Amazon has put out an edict that I didn't see coming, which is by January of 2025, everybody needs to come back to the office 5 days a week.
Yeah, it's the only reason this even caught my attention was actually twofold. Number one, where you and I live in Virginia, there are a lot of Amazon employees.
Yeah, massive campus that they're building in Alexandria.
Right. So between the data centers they have, so between the data centers in Ashburn and Reston, and then HQ2 over in Crystal City or National Landing, whatever they call it. Like there's a couple of guys in our neighborhood that work there. And I just started hearing grumbles about it because most of them have been working from home for either 2, 3, or even 4 days a week. Anyway, that's what prompted me to kind of think about this because, the neighborhood dads over beers in the afternoon are starting to grumble. And it's like, what's happening? And so it sounds like Amazon's trying to go full return to office 5 days a week, I think for everybody in January. And I thought this was particularly interesting for a couple of reasons. Number one, obviously they're making huge investments in real estate. So you got to use that. But number two, we've seen this before where in the past, especially when we were coming out of COVID, companies were kind of known to bring people back and use it as a way to get people to leave. So in other words, instead of getting the optics of layoffs, it was really more like, hey, pull them back into the office, cause enough friction that they start looking. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. And then the third is like, some of these people are, I think, kind of higher titles. Like, they're not button pressers. They're leading teams and stuff like that. And the grumbles after a couple of beers in the neighborhood are kind of like, I don't want to give up the time away from my family. And it's like these manager type people they're talking about leaving. So I wonder if it'll have this perverse effect of not only getting people to leave, but maybe the counterintuitive effect of like getting your A players to leave because they have so many other options. But I can't remember the last time I heard anybody else going full return to office. Have you?
No, especially at this scale. And I think, I wasn't thinking about it in the way that you mentioned, which I think, definitely has some credence. I mean, Amazon obviously has a lot of office space they've got to fill in Arlington. So I can understand why they'd want to take advantage of that. My personal opinion is I believe in working in an office environment for collaboration, but I support work from home in situations that require it. We have a couple employees that have young kids at home. One of them doesn't have childcare, and the other we're their second job. She's worked for us for a long time, and she's a 911 call center operator in the evenings, and she takes care of her kids during the day and does work for us when she can. And so we support that. I'd prefer we were all in an office, but we've had to, we've had to work that out with them because they're the right people for those jobs. And Amazon is just saying, we'll find the right person for the job. And to some degree, as you said in the pre-show, this wealth of qualified applicants on the market, which the Wall Street Journal article that we'll link to in the show notes talks about, people who can't get job interviews that are very highly qualified. And I've seen a bunch of this in my network, people who have reached out to me who have been very successful for quite some time and saying that not only aren't they getting jobs, that, they're not getting interviews. Even in one instance, somebody I know who's incredibly talented, and the people that were interviewing for the job knew that this person wanted to apply for the job, and an AI tool sorted her resume out of the stack and didn't push her forward for an interview. And so to your point, I think maybe the Amazons of the world feel like they have the ability to fill some of these leadership or highly skilled positions in a more meaningful way than maybe they could a couple of years ago. But I'll pull on one more string on this. What you said about Amazon clearing people out and what this causes in the workforce, and can these people get the next job? It got me thinking about something else too, which is, in moments in the past where we've seen sort of this sort of intersection, and obviously not the same, COVID, all that stuff, but in the past when we've seen a wealth of talent on the market, it's been a turn towards entrepreneurism. And you've seen more people go out and say, well, I can't find a job, I'm going to go start my own thing.
Which isn't necessarily a good thing, but yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, not to jump around between these two topics, I think the nuance here is that, those AI tools that are like, for example, the example you used, somebody who felt like they got sorted by these AI tools and stuff like that.
Right.
Is that because, the remote talent is more competitive now, and therefore like they're using these tools to kind of sort? I mean, is it because, I don't want to like make any like broad statements, that hurt somebody's feelings, but at the same time, the one of the challenges, so one of the benefits of remote work, aside from like the personal benefit of being able to spend more time with your family and be closer to them and not have to commute, that's a good benefit. But one of the downsides of it is now you're not competing with everybody that's within a 50-mile radius of the job you want. And that's a problem. That's hard, And so it's like, so that it raises this awkward and very uncomfortable question of like, is the job hunt difficult because there's too many applicants and those applicants, raise the bar? Or is it difficult because these AI tools are using, in that case, you mentioned AI tools, is the AI tool like overweighting some other criteria that we don't yet know about? I don't know. It's a very nuanced question because it raises these like really awkward questions about, what it means to be qualified today. I don't know about you. Like, I can't remember the last time I looked at a resume.
Oh yeah, I mean, we still look at them for the restaurant managers, but that's the only place that I look at resumes. Fair point. I think I think at any point where we see scale, we see distribution along the edges, and I think here with scale in terms of unemployed people, we're some of the distribution we're seeing on the edges is qualified people not getting good shots at jobs, and I don't see that going away anytime soon.
Yeah. I wonder, this is like way out in left field, but I do wonder if at some point, how there's a whole bunch of legislation around like equal opportunity employment. There's the ADA, I think it's the disability stuff where you have to like comply with that. I wonder, whatever you call that whole broad state of like employer protections or employee protections, I wonder if at some point we see, reform may not be the right word, but like I wonder if we see something around that, or where language gets inserted in to, I don't know, prevent like, okay, I'm a little inarticulate today, but we were talking about we've been talking about different forms of AI and LLMs and stuff like that on and off for the last couple of weeks. And one of the themes that seems to keep coming up, and I think you mentioned it in last week's episode, is that there seems to be bias. And I think you said this, like you were like, hey, I was reading something about like mortgages or something like that. And when using AI tools, it displayed a certain bias. I wonder if there's something similar here. And I guess my point, very weakly here, I suppose, is I wonder at some point if equal opportunity and all those like employee and consumer protections start to include the use of AI tools to prevent discrimination or other like unfair sort of practices. And again, that's probably above your pay grade and mine, but it goes back to like what your friend is experiencing. From what I understand of like the federal jobs reports and stuff like that, unemployment seems low. And, they paint a pretty rosy picture that there are jobs out there and things like that. Right. And so if that's true, and yet smart people, are seeing, having challenges, then the really awkward question is what in the world is actually happening here? Is it really as simple as like, man, the talent pool is just so much better and your friend didn't keep up? Or is there something more here where the underlying tools that are sorting these people are overweighting something or displaying some sort of like unintended discrimination? I don't know. It's more of a statement than a question.
Yeah, I'm sure there's unintended discrimination. I would say, like, I took a look before we got on at layoffs.fyi, and I continue to see plenty of companies that are laying people off. I think that, I think that jibes with what not the New York Times, what this Wall Street Journal article says. I think we've seen a lot of these sort of, layoffs and or other reductions in workforce. And I think, going back to something that you said about, creating new legislation, I'm not sure that we need new legislation, because I think the existing laws prevent discrimination in the hiring practices. What I think we need is, well, maybe not need's the wrong word to say it. If there's a need for something, it's probably more in the ability to understand how someone got passed over for a position, which is incredibly difficult at scale with the number of people that are out there. But to your point of my comment on redlining in our last episode about, black folks being able to get, or an inability to get mortgages back in the, 60s and 70s and all that. If somebody of a protected class isn't getting an interview today because of some sort of AI tool and some sort of AI sorting mechanism, that's going to be really tough to figure out. And I would also say too, just for whatever it's worth, and maybe this makes me sound like a curmudgeon, I don't want any qualified candidate to get passed over for an interview. I understand the scale issue. If there's 1,000 candidates for one position and there's one person doing the interviews, they're not going to interview all 1,000 people. And it doesn't say that I'm a disadvantaged candidate in that process. So if somebody's put in front of you, like from our standpoint, like we don't base any of our hiring decisions on any of those things. And quite frankly, I think we have a pretty diverse workforce, and I like that. I think there's
well, not only do you not do it, you can't do it, right?
You can't, but there are plenty of companies that do it. I see companies that do it. Look, I mean, I can show you companies in like businesses that we're in, including restaurants, where the restaurant industry is a cultural mixing pot. But I know plenty of folks who have 30 and 40 restaurants, and every one of their general managers is a white male. And it's like, well, come on, like you can't tell me that that's the math here. It's sort of like the NFL being predominantly African American, and there's like one or two black coaches. Like it's like, come on, guys, like let's just be honest here. But I also say too, I think, and I don't want to sound cheeky when I say this, I think that the government that our current government, just the way that we go about these sorts of things, is probably the worst sort of people to come up with regulation on how to do this fairly. And that's the conundrum. Like I want the process to be fair, but I don't know that we're equipped to, I think you and I talked about this. I don't know that the current batch of regulators are really well versed enough in AI to make good decisions about how it should be deployed. And I think that's a really big problem for us.
I don't think any of us really are.
I know I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not either. I just, I know this is probably not where we intended to go on this, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see something here. Like, so this is probably a little over the top, but like if I apply for credit, let's just say I apply for a credit card or I apply for anything that uses my credit and I get denied.
Yep.
We have legislation in place that says I got to get a letter back. Obviously, like if you're standing at the dealership and you don't get approved, they just tell you you're not approved. But I think the legislation says then you've got to get a letter in the mail that says, here's why. I wonder if we're going to see something in the future where, obviously everybody would agree, I think, that we don't want too much burden on companies. Like in that scenario where you explained, like, hey, you got one person hiring and you got 1,000 applicants. We don't want any additional burden there. But I can't help but wonder that, given this other topic we're going to talk about, AI legislation, I wonder if we're going to see something later where it's like, hey, if you as an employer used any sort of AI or tools like that to filter in any way, then you do need to like send a rejection letter to explain why, which I know broaches a crazy amount of other topics, but I just like, it's there's going to be something here because what is not going to be, I don't know, it's just going to get very awkward here really soon if I mean, I don't know. I feel like if somebody goes out there and says, gosh, these AI tools that we're using to like filter resumes is displaying bias, you're potentially crossing a lot of lines that may catch the attention of some people that write the rules. So
I definitely think it'll catch their attention. I think that, at the end of the day, the best case scenario we can hope for in a situation like that is that it gives birth to a wave of companies that handle this for employers. Because I can tell you today, I mean, we sift through hundreds of applications a day to find good management candidates for our restaurants. And the math is not in our favor. One of my fellow franchisees who I have a lot of respect for, his business partner lamented the fact that outside hires real struggle right now in terms of getting them to understand the culture and fit into the mix. And so he actually put together a spreadsheet. They went over 18 months of hiring data, and they found that over 70% of external applicants for management positions didn't make it 6 months in the job. I mean, it's just stunning numbers. So I would say the best case scenario is that an industry of companies pop up that, to your point, help clarify why somebody didn't get an interview, why they were sorted out. Gap in job history, irrelevant experience, bad job title, whatever, but that somebody can create technology to write the algorithm or to write the rules that say, look, score someone who doesn't have gaps in job history higher than somebody who does, those sorts of things, to be able to answer it. Because as a company, we can barely get all the interviews scheduled, let alone get back to everyone who applies.
Yeah, but the nuance there, tell me if you disagree. The nuance there is that let's say a rule, so that's the nuance between a rules-based engine and these LLM-based engines is that the rule-based engine was written by somebody. So if there was, for example, a filter that eventually is discovered to be potentially discriminatory, you have a way to go back and understand, okay, that's a problem. And then optionally, who wrote it? And is that a problem? Right. The nuance here is that with these LLMs and things like that, it's not exactly transparent how the decision may have been made. In other words, the decision that AI tool made was not because of a rule, but because of some training data somewhere that taught it that. And so that's where that line gets a little bit murky.
Yeah, I'd almost argue that are you familiar with E-Verify, the hiring system to verify EINs?
Yes, just I've only ever used it like that. I don't know anything underneath it.
No, that's fine. Under the hood. Yeah, no. I if you just understand that piece of it, I would say what I'd be more in favor of as an employer would be to say, let's build a system, and I prefer the free market built it. The free market build system that when I try to write a rule that violates or creates a discriminatory hiring practice, it says, sorry, you can't do that.
Yeah.
That to me would be more efficient than trying to police all of these companies and their hiring practices. So it would be, hey, I'm going to submit a rule that says this is how we're going to interview people, and you tell me whether that meets the criteria of a fair hiring practice or not.
Yep.
All right, so let's pivot into this AI article from TechCrunch, because there's so much in this article, and I don't think we're going to get through.
Yeah, it's a good segue too, right? Because it's like you're starting to see some of this legislation. But sorry, I'll let you set it up.
Yeah, so this article on TechCrunch is the title of the article is "Here's What's Illegal Under California's 8 and Counting New AI Laws," and I'll just say, I'll focus on a couple here, and if you want to talk about others, happy to. But I think there's a couple of things here that are very relevant to things that we've discussed on the show, and there's some stuff in here that's I would say most people can agree on, like, hey, you can't make a fake nude picture of someone and use it to harass or threaten them. But there are two things I think that fall in these categories of things that you and I have talked about. The first off is AB 2602 requires studios to obtain permission from an actor before creating an AI-generated replica of their voice or likeness. We've talked about this with Scarlett Johansson and ChatGPT, so that's one that I thought was interesting. And then the other is SB 942, which essentially says that in the state of California, how the heck they're going to regulate this, any AI-generated image needs to have a watermark on it that tells people it's AI-generated. So take whichever one of those you want first, and then happy to explore any of the others.
Well, I mean, look, I don't know if, I think that, I'm trying to pick my words here. I think that we're in this kind of wild west right now in terms of AI and image generation and things like that. And I think that version 1 of any legislation around this is going to look a little weird.
Yeah.
So I mean, look, I think first of all, let's go with that, 2602 that you just talked about. At face value, it kind of makes sense. If you're gonna, I mean, particularly with actors, their likeness and their voice, and that is how they make their money.
Sure.
And at face value, without having read the underlying text of that legislation, at face value, that makes sense, right? Like, hey, if that's how you make your money, somebody else should not just have the ability to just make another version of you. I mean, that would theoretically destroy all the income for any actor out there, So that makes sense. And then in terms of like the watermarks, conceptually makes a lot of sense. However, to bypass these rules, all you got to do is step into the next state. And even if all 50 states step into this, like, it's really got to be, like, what stops somebody from like then going overseas and saying, whatever. I guess my point is that like the conceptually, these things make sense. The enforcement I think is a more interesting point. How are they going to do this? And maybe it'll fall under the MCA, takedown notices. I don't know. Like, maybe that's how that enforcement will go, is that like, if you notice it, you can use that DMCA process. But again, the issue is like, what if it's being hosted from a country that doesn't need to comply or hasn't chosen to follow that process?
Well, and I'll take it a step further. How do you, and I agree with you completely. Like, I think the Scarlett Johansson thing was a great example of how there aren't enough guardrails around protecting a likeness that somebody may have spent years, perfecting. That's their brand, if you will. But who's deciding if the voice is too close to Scarlett Johansson's or not? I mean, it's one thing to put legislation out there, which I agree with. We need legislation that says you can't do this. Who decides, to your point about the DMCA, the takedown notes, who decides the voice is too close? The likeness, right, I think, is a lot easier. I think we would all agree that visual imagery is clearer than auditory imagery. But are we basing it on, how high pitched the voice is, how low pitched, how many, like, what's, voice signature comparison? I mean, it gets really complicated. That age old saying back in the, that would have been the late 80s, early 90s presidential election, where the vice presidential candidate said, I don't know how to define pornography, but I know it when I see it. Like, if you showed me an image of Scarlett Johansson that was created as a deep fake, I could tell you with a relatively high degree of accuracy whether it looked like her or not.
Right. We've talked about, we've talked about this in the past, that like some sort of legislation is going to happen. The big question is like, how many versions of it are we going to trip and stumble over? But some of these things actually, need to get solved, or at least begin to get solved sooner rather than later. Like this idea of like deep fakes. Well, that's a real problem. Whether we're talking about, nudity, or we're talking about like election candidates. I mean, that's we got to do something. Like, I don't think these, particularly now that we're in election season as well, doing something is probably better than doing nothing. But what we're going to also find out here is that with some of this, if we come, some of this is going to get discovered to be a little too heavy-handed when it gets rolled out. But conceptually, like, I can't really, hate on this. Again, I haven't read the underlying letters, but when I think about the concept of watermarks, well, the idea of like wanting to know where this image originally came from in terms of the metadata, that makes sense. And,
sure.
Nobody actually ever had a problem with the fact that like all of our digital cameras, including our phones, embed the metadata. Although, I'm sorry, just real quick, this just reminded me, I posted a picture of my kids the other day on Facebook, and all I did was, how like when you take a picture on the phone and then you go into like the little edit thing and you hit the little enhance button?
Yeah.
So I hit the little button, did that, and then I just happened to go out I put it up on Facebook or whatever on my personal account. And what was interesting was in my Facebook feed, I guess, it actually flagged it as possible AI.
Because you enhanced it.
I guess, yeah. And all I did was I just hit the button that like fixes the contrast and stuff like that. But maybe it does something more. I don't know enough about the underlying technology there to know exactly what's happening. But the point is that I think I feel comfortable saying I didn't like smooth anybody's skin. I just hit the button hoping that like the colors would get fixed. But something must have happened in there that triggered it.
Yeah, if we're gonna say that any filter applied to a picture constitutes AI, there's gonna be a lot of
you're gonna have a lot of social media influencers that they're gonna hate on. But again, I think conceptually, this is the right direction. So I guess what I'll say is I think what they're proposing in California seems directionally right, and I do think something has to be done. Big question is do other states follow suit relatively quickly? B, how quickly do we start to figure out how to enforce this stuff and define that murkiness or try to contain that or limit that murkiness? Because to your point, like, where does it, like, if somebody were to create a deep fake of me, how many changes are required to make it not actually be me? I don't know. Like, is it a longer hair? Is it a shaved face? I don't know, right? Like, but this, it's like back to your point where whoever it is that said like, I don't know how to define porn, but I know it when I see it. It's like, it's almost like this. Like, it's like, I don't know how to define what would be a deep fake version of Ed versus the real Ed, but I think I would know it if I saw it. Yeah. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that works out, but directionally, I think this is the right way to go, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, now that I say it out loud, by the way, the concept of like even deep fake nudes is probably even more broadly applicable here. Cause like, God help us if like people start doing this with like, kids start making these things of like some other kid in school.
Yeah.
Ooh, that is going to get real messy real fast.
It may. And, I want to read something from one of the other bills because I think this illustrates how complicated these issues of AI are. There are a couple of bills that deal with election deepfakes, which, are obviously very, very timely for us in a presidential election year. And, the example that they used in this bill, AB 2355, says that means moving forward, Trump may not be able to get away with posting AI deepfakes of Taylor Swift endorsing him on Truth Social. So I went and dug into that bill a bit because I was curious, are there penalties? And if so, what do they look like? And who's adjudicating this? And so I looked at the text of the bill on a website, and I'll just read you a couple bits here. The bill would authorize any registered voter to bring an action in Superior Court seeking a temporary or permanent restraining order or injunction against the publication, printing, circulation, posting, or distribution of any qualified political advertisement that violates these disclosures requirements. So what they're saying is, this is not like a takedown notice. This has to go to a court. And the other thing I think that's interesting, it's missing here, is there are no damages. So I go to court, I say, hey, Paul put up a video of me that's not truthful about our campaign. He needs to take it down. And if I can do that in some form of a timely measure, which I think is a big if, I mean the courts are already pretty inundated, so the court makes a quick decision on this, and then I don't take it down. I would assume that legislators are contemplating these sorts of things, but the legislation as it's written right now that appears to have gone to Governor Newsom's desk for signature doesn't seem to have the ramifications if I don't take it down.
Yeah, that's strange that they would leave that out. I wonder, that can't be an oversight. I wonder if that has something to do with somehow utilizing existing language that might be out there for some other, I don't know. Like, so for example, with DMCA, it's a pretty well understood process of like, hey, if I file the complaint and you don't take it down in a timely manner, then I can go upstream to your provider and
right.
go that route, right?
Right.
So I would find it surprising if like career legislators didn't put teeth in this, and maybe the fact that it doesn't exist in that paperwork as you read it, I wonder if that implies that they believe that the enforcement of it or the damages of it or whatever are encapsulated in some other legislation that's already existing. I don't know. I'm guessing, but that would just seem like an odd rookie mistake to make for people that spend their entire career writing these things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. It's an interesting one for sure. I think that's probably a good place to pin it. I mean, there's a ton of stuff here on the AI legislation, and I think we're going to find a whole lot more about it over time. But I think at first blush, I would say I'm glad to see that there's some direction on this. As you said, I think it's going to be messy, but I think we need it.
Yes, I think it's a good place to pin it. I think it just further reinforces the fact that like this stuff's not going away.
Yes.
And I think that like it just ties together really nicely with the stuff we've been kind of dealing with over the last couple of weeks of like, okay, everybody wants AI tools and AI like augmented employees and stuff like that, but that it becomes really murky,
Yeah.
Everything from like E&O insurance to liability and all that stuff. Like, where does it start and end if these tools get involved? So
yeah,
it's not going to go away. That's for sure.
No, it's definitely not going to go away anytime soon.
So all right, man. So you just got back. What's next on the old travel calendar for you?
By the time this episode goes live, I will have driven down to Charlottesville to watch my daughter run in a 5K, gone to Blacksburg for Parents Weekend, headed to DC for a meeting at Five Guys headquarters, and flown to Vegas and probably Denver by the time this episode goes live. Yeah, that's between now and Thursday.
That just seems grueling, but
so it's Friday. So Friday, Saturday, not sleeping in my own bed. Sunday, sleeping in my own bed. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, not sleeping in my own bed. So I'll sleep in my own bed once between now and this time next week. Isn't that awesome?
That's insane. Well, when this episode goes live, I'll be down in Sarasota. We're doing getting our team together for a couple days. I'll be down in Florida Wednesday through Friday. But I feel like I can't even say that because that has nothing on your your travel schedule over the next couple weeks or next couple days, I should say. All right, man. Well, I hope you actually get to do your laundry and I don't know.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
Kick it at home for a little bit before you get back in the car tomorrow morning.
Yeah, no, tonight. We're getting in the car in 4 hours.
Oh, you are a madman.
I think a shower would be a great idea.
All right. Well, hopefully you get some wine or champagne in there somewhere.
All right, man. I'll talk to you later.
All right, buddy. I'll see you.